I'd like to introduce Dr. Benscoter. Bud, as I know him, has nearly 30 years of experience in training design, performance consulting, leadership communication, sales, and organization development. He is the owner currently of GMB Performance Group, a company specializing in organizational development, human performance improvement, and training. Bud has a master's and PhD in instructional systems design from Penn State, where he actually taught for 20 years in both the instructional systems and the MBA programs. He's also taught numerous HPT related programs at Duke University, George Mason, Purdue, and as well currently at Boise State. Bud is one of the more prolific authors in our field with the publishing of the Encyclopedia of Human Resource Management in 2012. He has a graduate textbook called Performance Consulting in 2013, and he co-authored the fifth edition of the industry classic, Managing the Instructional Design Process in 2015. So, that being said, I'm going to hand over the reins to you, Bud, and welcome and thank you again for being here with us today.
Well, I'm very glad. Thank you, Gurley. That's a great introduction. And yeah, let me echo the welcome to you folks, particularly those of you who are in the OPWL program. I mean, this is spring break, so I would think if you're in the program, this would have been the week where you wanted to kind of rest your mind a little bit and get off the topic. So I really do appreciate the fact that you're here. Um, you can see from the title that's up that we're going to talk about consulting and project management skills for instructional designers and maybe take a little bit different tact than you might be expecting. And during the session, as Grayley alluded to, I will stop periodically at certain strategic places in the presentation and ask you to make any comments, ask any questions before we move on. But I also want to encourage you to use the chat box too. So I'm going to try to multitask here and go through, do my presentation for you, introduce you to some concepts around these two topics while I'm keeping my eye on the chat box as well. So if you have a question or you have a comment, put it in there. Either Grayley or I will catch it and we'll address it immediately at that point. So I thought when I planned this session that it might be a good place to start to give you an opportunity to assess your own experience, either past or current experience with consulting. And to do that, I put together a little questionnaire, a little survey for you. And Grayley's going to post that in the chat box. I can see he's typing now, so I expect we're going to see the link here any minute. And I'm going to give you when that, there it is. So when that shows up, I want you to click on that link, and I'm going to give all of you about, no, let's say 4 or 5 minutes, or only 10 items in the survey to take that survey. And so we'll go mute here for 4 or 5 minutes, let you complete that survey. All right, well, Linda's typing. And before I move off this cover page, in the lower left is my contact information. So I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's beautiful here, but chilly today. The hot weather's coming, they tell me. If anything that is talked about during the webinar today that you want to follow up on, any references or experiences that you want to follow up on, please feel free to contact me at either of those contact points, either by email or by phone. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about anything that's discussed today. I didn't hear about that consulting. Yeah, for energy efficiency. So would I, Linda. Let's hope we do have some time. So, because it's always good to get some experience from other fields. Sometimes we think consulting is consulting. That isn't necessarily true. So, all right. So let's move on. And we'll come back to as I said, the aggregate results of that survey later on. And if you had it sent to your email, you'll be able to see what you responded individually to. So this is the agenda. I want to talk a little bit about the consulting process. And of course, there are numerous models, numerous approaches to what constitutes consulting. We're going to start with one of the most famous and basic models, and then toward the end, kind of maybe tickle your fancy a little bit on what consulting could become, and maybe, hopefully for you, it is just that. We want to discuss management concepts for career enhancements. That's personal management as well as the management of our instructional design careers and processes. Then move to, again, what I would, at least in my experience, was the most rewarding consulting experiences that I've ever had. And those were cases in which I was viewed as a trusted advisor and served as a trusted advisor. In fact, the real purpose of this session, I think, is to kind of stimulate your thinking to A, answer the question, is that where I want to be? And B, if it is where I want to be, where am I now in my practice? And how do I get to that point if that's where I want to be? And to help you sort of address that issue, we'll look at the self-assessment that you just took, again in the aggregate, and then kind of overlay it onto that trusted advisor approach, and then give you plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm tracking the clock. It's 2:20 now. We certainly don't want to go beyond an hour with this session. I want to give you plenty of time to be able to ask questions. And again, as we go along, if you have a comment or a question, put it into the chat box. Greatly, if I don't see it, stop me and point me to it, or just unmute your mic and go ahead and ask questions. So the industry classic goes all the way back to the early 70s, was Peter Block's flawless consulting process. And in that, I still think it has so much relevance. And again, if I look at my 35-year career, there are times when I spent time in each of these relationships. So Peter Block said that we as consultants, and again, I'm using that term very broadly. So if you're working inside an organization as an instructional designer, instructional developer, training developer, I would hope that you have opportunities to practice consulting skills. So I'm using the term very broadly, but Peter Block said there are three categories that we tend to move sometimes back and forth in. Sometimes we're really only stuck in one. The pair of hands, I'm going to define each and give you examples and then sort of challenge you to think about where you might be in your practice right now. So it would be the pair of hands. Some of us, or sometimes, will function as an expert in terms of our consulting role. And in other times, we collaborate with our clients. So we're collaborators. So let me give you kind of an overview of each of those. So if we look at the pair of hands in the upper left, probably best described by the phrase, I don't have the time or the inclination to do this, so I want you to do it for me. You're handed a project. You're pretty much told what the project should look like, what the final deliverable should be, how much time you have, how much budget you have, and oh, by the way, check back with me periodically and I'll tell you whether you're giving me what I've asked you to give me. I do this myself, I just don't have the time to do it. So you can see some of the advantages, right? Although maybe being in a passive role isn't so much of an advantage, but it's certainly what this approach puts you in, is much more of a passive role, passive in terms of your relationship with the client, because the client is controlling the process. Two-way communication is fairly limited because, again, you've been sort of sent off to do this and, then come back with the final product. And there are disadvantages, right? You're dependent on the client's ability to diagnose the problem. Let's say a client comes to you and says, we need a conflict resolution training program. We've been having a lot of issues in our department. They just don't seem to be able to handle conflict very well. I want you to go off and develop a conflict resolution program. And I have some ideas of what that should be too. Here are my ideas. Pull this together. Let's see if we can do it in 30 days, kind of thing. So you're very much limited in how much influence you can exert over the final product because it's kind of been dictated to you. Roger, you're asking about copies of this PowerPoint presentation. Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure that you get it. And as the session's being recorded anyway, I'm assuming that the recording will track these PowerPoint slides. Gurley, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, PowerPoint slides will be available. Not a problem. That's routine.
Okay. All right. So there's that. And frankly, out of graduate school, freshly minted PhD, I think the first couple of assignments I had with consulting firms and then in the computer industry, I would probably have put myself in that box, in that pair of hands box. Even with a PhD, I don't think I really functioned as an expert. I was pretty much told what to develop, and that's what I developed early in my career. So the expert role is where the client says, I don't know how to do this. You're the expert, you're the instructional designer, so I want you to do it for us. Well, okay, still very often collaboration isn't necessarily required because the client has great faith in your ability to do it. You just come back and tell me when it's done, kind of thing, right? So you decide how things get done, you're in control. That could be an advantage. And your job is to solve the immediate problem. Again, let's say that conflict resolution example. You've been told to do it. You're the expert in training design. You go off and develop it, bring it back to me when you're done. There are some disadvantages too, right? The client may be reluctant to take recommended action. So particularly if you're an external consultant, an external instructional designer, developer, the client may be resistant to sort of open up the organization to issues that they really don't want you to know about necessarily. Let's say particularly around a topic like conflict resolution. I mean, you want to get in there and roll your sleeves up and find out, well, what kind of conflict are we talking about? What are the origins of it? And the client may be kind of resistant to open the organization to you. And as most of you know from your experiences with performance consulting, you may never really get to the people element that's at the heart of the problem. It may not be a knowledge deficiency at all. It may very well relate to people issues, not understanding, what their roles are, not being, schooled in how to handle conflict. And it could be a myriad number of things that you may never uncover. So the ultimate role in Peter Block's model anyway was collaborative, right? Let's work together on this. And so the advantage here is that you share responsibility with your client. Decision making tends to be bilateral. So, you make some decisions, the client makes decisions, you negotiate those ahead of time, whose responsibility it is to do what. And you learn more about the business too that you're working in, right? So if you were sent off to do conflict resolution, working in a collaborative environment, you're more likely to find out how that business operates, how the people, how they get along, what are some of the internal human resource processes, all those kinds of things. But there can be disadvantages too. Sometimes it's seen as foot dragging, right? So, the client approaches you to develop something and you say, fine, but I think we'll come out the other end much more effectively if we have a collaborative relationship. And here's what that means. We're periodically going to sit down and talk about our progress and try to uncover some of the things that may have an impact other than just training. And, sometimes clients will look at that and say, can't you just do this for me in 30 days? Why do we have to spend all this time talking about things and, negotiating things? Why do we need to do that? Let's just get this done. So it does take more time, and you do depend more closely on the work habits of other people because you're working collaboratively with them. So having said those, this is the first probably time I think that, I can stop and ask you to either make some comments, ask some questions, and at the very least, sort of think about your own role. Think about your own experience, either your current experience or in the past when you've worked with clients and had client relationships. Which of these tended to be, let's say, more common? Which ones did you find to be more challenging? Which ones did you like? Any thoughts on this before we move on? From your experience, do you see yourself playing all of these roles during an engagement? Well, it's interesting you should ask that. I think early in my career, I probably moved between these roles more so than I do in my career today, or let's say maybe within the last 10 or 15 years. And maybe it's because probably I've learned a lot about how to establish collaborative relationships up front. I'm very uncomfortable with the first two anymore. I really am. I almost run away from the term expert. I think in some ways, in some people's eyes, it's a pejorative term. I'd much rather have a collaborative relationship, and I do everything I can to set the tone for that at the beginning. So, yeah, I've played every role for sure, but Tona, I spend most of my time, my job filling a pair of hands role, yeah, but I'm slowly moving to the expert role. Okay, good. Independent instructional designer, Lisette. I tend to act in the collaboration space. Yeah, though if it's a writing heavy project, I may act in the expert space. Good, good. Jessica, I've usually been the pair of hands, but those projects usually ended up not working out because of lack of sponsorship. Right, exactly, right. And what often happens in the pair of hands, even the expert role, is if the project doesn't work, you're the one that gets the blame because the client was not involved collaboratively in the development of the process and the product. So, okay, good observations, really, really good. And we can talk more about them. Let me kind of move on at this point. Grayley mentioned that I co-authored with Bill Rothwell, Dr. Bill Rothwell from Penn State, those publications Grayley mentioned on performance consulting, and the one we published 2 years ago, the fifth edition of the instructional design, Mastering the Instructional Design Process. We used, and each of the issues of that book, Mastering the Instructional Design Process, used the competencies developed by an organization called the International Board of Standards for Training, Performance, and Improvement. Real mouthful, isn't it? ISPI, that's even worse, but they need a new acronym. But their most recent set of competencies that we used to develop the textbook we wrote was 2012. And I'm spending a few moments on this because I'd urge you to get your hands on those competencies if you haven't seen them already. A number of sources in our field have pointed to these competencies as probably the best researched and most comprehensive set of instructional design competencies that are on the market today. And I would have to agree. I think they're much more complete and better researched than ATDs are, for example. So I want to spend a couple of moments on those because as this slide suggests, ISPI identified foundation competencies for instructional designers that they built their processes around. Just wanted to highlight a couple of them in terms of how they support our consulting and project management skills. So you can read them as well as I can read them to you, right? Clear and correct writing, active listening, right? So a basic core competency is not only our ability to listen to our client, but actively listen, to stop occasionally and say, can we stop for a moment and let me kind of rephrase what I just heard you say to make sure that, we're on target? Constructive feedback, that's not only receiving constructive feedback, but also giving it as well. So if we go back to those three boxes we just talked about, that's pretty much restricted, isn't it, to a collaborative relationship. I'm not likely, as an expert or pair of hands, to tell a client, or to point out to a client some deficiency they might have. But I am more likely to do it in a collaborative relationship. Meeting facilitation, certainly, collaboration and consensus building, and the big one too, negotiation and conflict resolution. These are foundational competencies that we as instructional designers need to have if we're ever going to have collaborative relationships, let alone the ones that I'm going to show you in a few moments in the trusted advisor approach. And of course, status reporting relates a lot to our project management capabilities. The other thing, and just let me get through the ISPI competencies here for a moment. The other thing that ISPI did in 2012, and again, that was their 4th edition of the competencies, they added a whole new category called management. And that's not only management by individual contributor instructional designers, right? But department managers as well. So in terms of managing the instructional design process, whether you're an individual contributor or a manager, these are skills that ISPI, again, research-based, found to be important. Business skills align with strategic plans. So as a collaborative instructional design consultant, we should be having a conversation about how what we do supports the strategic plans of the organization. If we're doing something that doesn't seem to have any relationship to what the organization is trying to achieve, then I guess in some ways we have an ethical challenge, don't we? Because we're not contributing necessarily to what the organization is trying to do. Develop instructional development business cases, gain support for instructional design. And of course, in collaborative relationships, we have to know how to manage partnerships, share these collaborative responsibilities. And of course, we have project management competencies and skills that we need to have as well. So I'm trying to track the questions. Roger, are there any additional competencies for a performance improvement consultant? Yes, and there are. I wish we had time to talk about them here, but I would urge you, I have it right here in front of me, to get your hands on ISPI's publication. It's called Instructional Designer Competencies. And in addition to adding the manager capability or the manager set of competencies, there are performance consulting competencies as well identified in that competency set. So that could probably be a whole nother webinar talking about those. But yes, ISPI recognizes that our field is moving much more into the performance consulting arena, and there are competencies that can be done. Could you repeat the name of the book, Bud? Yes, whoops. Well, there's the next slide. It's called the Instructional Designer Competencies, the Standards, 4th edition. And it's published by ISPI, that's IBSTPI. If you have trouble finding it, let me know, okay? And because the editor was a grad student with me when I was at Penn State, so I know her very well. But I think you'll be able to find it pretty well. I definitely would get my hands on that, folks, if you can.
Excuse me, Bud. We could probably post that title at the end of the webinar.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. Again, if it seems that I'm moving along pretty fast, I want to leave some time for the survey and the discussion of the survey. So in terms of project management tools, again, those of you in the OPWL program know this very well, that in the project courses, needs assessment, instructional design, and so on, we ask you to use most of these project management tools, because we know that once you're in the field, and of course most of you are in the field already, good, strong project management tools are very, very important. So one of the students in my class this term, or this semester, has a new job. I'm really thrilled to hear that. And she's putting together a professional development plan for herself. And she realized, and I was glad to see this, that one of those professional development needs is project management. developing good, strong project management skills. Of course, the zenith is PMI, the Project Management Institute certification. It's very difficult, very time consuming, but it's certainly the industry standard for project management capabilities. So as you kind of go down that list, right, I would argue these are fundamental project management tools. Having a good, strong project charter, which includes those things that you see on the screen in front of you, the statement of work, responsibility matrix, who's responsible for what, a good, strong communication plan, and of course, a project plan that includes risk management. And there's another aspect of project management that I would also urge you to explore as you develop professionally is look at risk management and be able to identify the factors that could put your projects in jeopardy and how you're going to mitigate those factors. So this is the part that I really want to sort of tickle your fancy with a little bit, get you to think about. And I guess the framing question I'm asking is, so where can all of this lead us? All of what? Well, all of our discussion about the importance of consulting skills as well as good, strong project management skills. And for me, my hope, it's always been my hope for myself, and I guess my hope for you too, is that we can at some point experience what is generally called to be a trusted advisor role. So this is a depiction, and on the lower right-hand side, if you're going to get the Instructional Design Competencies book, which I'm looking again at my copy, it's all highlighted, dog-eared, annotated. The other book that I would absolutely have on my shelf is the one mentioned in the lower right, which is Maester Green and Gelford's The Trusted Advisor. Again, my copy's all dog-eared, highlighted, and annotated as well. I think it's a wonderful model for those of us in this field who want to move out of the pair of hands and the expert role and become much more of a collaborative individual in our organization, and even more so, a trusted advisor. So let me just give you a brief description of the model. You can see there's that on the vertical axis is the breadth of business issues that you deal with, high or low, and the horizontal axis is the depth of personal relationships that you develop within an organization. And I've numbered each one. So if you look at number one, the subject matter expert, right? So we have this label. We're instructional designers, training developers, whatever that label is that we have, we're considered to be subject matter experts so that, our role is basically to provide a service. So it's a service offering based role that we play in the organization. We may not have much of a breadth of business issues, and we may not have much of a personal relationship in the organization because, again, particularly if we're expert or pair of hands, we're told what to do and we do it, we develop it. But as we move up that scale, we get more involved in the issues of the business. We get a much more personal relationship. We develop much more personal relationships. Now we're still the subject matter expert, but we have what's generally called an affiliated field. In other words, we understand and begin to understand more about how the business functions so that what we're providing meets a business need. Now, to do that, that's a personal challenge for a lot of us too, isn't it? Is to understand the business in more depth, well beyond our instructional design responsibilities. As we continue to do that, you can see the third step is to be viewed as a valuable resource. And now they come to you not because of your expertise, but because they have developed a good, strong relationship with you. And they're beginning to trust you as a source of, you're a sounding board for them. You have creative ideas about how to handle challenges. And the ultimate is the trusted advisor, right? Trust-based. I had a client that I achieved that level too. I'll never forget it because it was really so kind of, well, it wasn't kind of, it was very fulfilling for me to achieve that role where I knew that client would come to me with issues not related to my role in the organization, but because that client trusted me and, was able to talk about a variety of business issues, sometimes even personal issues. And, it was a very fulfilling relationship. To do that, of course, those arrows on the bottom kind of indicate that, we've got to be very skilled and competent in our ability to engage a client, to listen to them, to frame the challenges that we hear them saying, to envision solutions, even when they're not necessarily realizing they have a problem. And then, of course, to commit to helping them succeed. So there's a lot to this for sure, but this is the role that, I would hope all of us can experience in our careers. And there's no reason that we can't. It's just understanding what the challenges are, understanding how we need to know so much more about the business, and then how we develop good, strong relationships with our clients. So, any thoughts or comments on that? And we're going to move to the survey and survey results. Okay, Donna. An instructional designer to move away from being a pair of hands and an order taker into a collaborator when the organization doesn't recognize the person as a subject matter in her field. I spent a lot of time feeling undervalued in my organization. We've probably all at one point in our careers felt that, Donna, because I don't think they realize that I have skills set that goes beyond just taking orders. You can answer this question, yeah, when it's convenient. Yeah. Well, I think the other aspect I haven't even talked about here, which is probably the third leg of this stool, is change management, isn't it? So, it's being able to influence change in an organization so that they understand the value that we bring. Of course, we have to demonstrate that value as well. And I think sometimes the biggest change management challenge is our own management. There's the people we directly report to who may not be very good themselves at selling what we do, and convincing clients that we have a lot of value. So I think at the risk of putting you in a tough situation, I'm not suggesting that you work around your own management, but if you have clients that you believe have a very narrow view of what you have to offer, I would, in fact, I've done this, sometimes mostly successful, sometimes not so successful, actually gone to clients, sat down with them, and shared with them what value you could be adding to them. That what you offer can offer them is much greater than what they perceive you to be. So I know it's a short answer. I wish we had more time to talk about it, and we can. Give me a call or whatever, and we can talk more about it. But yeah, yes, okay, Roger, good. The Trusted Advisor Field Book is also useful. That's right. That's right. It is. Yeah, and I don't want to, minimize the answer to your question. It's a very comprehensive question, but I'm glad you're asking, because that's exactly where you should be professionally, is challenging, the fact that, whoa, wait a minute, I can do a lot more than people think I can. Now, how do I show that? All right, so what did that self-assessment show us? Grady, I assume that the results are all ready for me to access?
Yes, that's a 10-4, bud.
That's a 10-4. All right. Whoa, listen to that. All right. So as we kind of go through these, right, I have a broad knowledge of my client's organization. This is kind of how the data, oh, look at that. It's interesting. Yeah. 40% answered somewhat agree. Bear with me, I'm a little colorblind sometimes. But so you can see it's kind of all over the place, right? I challenge my client's views, opinions, and or definition of the problem. Okay, so at least half of you said, yes, I do. I do that. My client expects me to deliver a solution with minimal involvement on his or her part. Look at the distribution of that, right? 20% of you said, yes, I agree. And that's either the expert or pair of hands relationship we were talking about. I take full control and responsibility for projects. 40% of you agreed with that. I write up what has been agreed to and communicate this to my clients. You can see that 40% agreed, 30% somewhat agreed. I use strong project control techniques such as progress reports, conflict management, and so on. 40% agreed with that, 30% somewhat agreed. My client sees me as a valuable business resource. Oh, good. If I'm reading that correctly, that's the strongly agree. So half of you strongly agree that you're seen as a valuable business resource. Good. So the assumption I'm making there is that what you're doing aligns with the business, the strategy and goals of the business, at least in the eyes of your client. I approach my client with performance improvement ideas without being asked to do so. And Tona, this is kind of what I'm suggesting you might want to think about doing to increase or enhance the value of what you do. Approach your clients with ideas when they haven't asked for them. If you've observed what's going on, why not sit down with them and say, based on what I've been observing or a recent experience or whatever, I have a suggestion for something that might, improve your operation, might improve employee engagement, whatever it happens to be, and impose that suggestion. I will not provide solutions that I believe will fail to address the core problem. Of course, you understand the implication behind this, right? This is very much an ethical question. So if I'm asked to deliver training, this is a classic in our field, isn't it? If I'm asked to deliver training and I know training's not the solution to the problem, I won't do it. Or I'll push back hard enough to convince people that I'm sorry, that's not the solution. That's not the solution to this problem. The problem is much more pervasive, or deeper, or involves other solutions. And my client seeks my advice in a wide range of business and personal issues. And look at that; it's pretty much all over the board. That's fascinating. That's a fascinating result. So what I did here, and this is the last slide, and we can take the final few minutes and ask questions and comments or respond to anything you want, is to sort of, this is very unscientific, by the way, is to overlay those questions, and they're not in the order in which they were asked, but to overlay those questions on the trusted advisor model that we looked at back here, if you remember, right? So this process here, here's the trusted advisor model kind of overlaid on those surveys. So if you look down the bottom of the 4 levels here, from the subject matter expert, right, to the affiliated field, to valuable resource, to the trusted advisor, those questions more or less track along that model. So at the bottom that it says, I take full control and responsibility for projects. Well, that's the pair of hands relationship or the expert relationship. There's not a lot of collaboration, not a lot of discussion. It's given to you. It's your job to bring it back in 30 days, 60 days, whatever it happens to be. But if I look at the top of that, way up at the top, my client seeks my advice in a wide range of business and personal issues. If you can honestly say, yes, that I have a client or my clients, more than one, seek my advice in a wide range of business issues and even personal issues, you may well be on your way to being a trusted advisor, somebody that has gone far beyond their stated expertise, instructional design or training, and now are seen as somebody that, that they trust and will go to you with questions and assistance. So, Lisa, I'm sorry taking these out of order. What do you mean by personal issues in that last question? Well, I know this is a little sticky, right? And you certainly don't. I mean, we just have to use our good common sense to know when this may be going too far. But in trusted advisor relationships, people sometimes even see you as sort of a pop psychologist, right? You know, So they may have issues not directly related to their business responsibilities that they just need somebody to talk to about them. And if you're that person, if you've arrived at that because you've been so helpful and you've contributed so much in a business role that they see you as somebody that they think, can provide some suggestions in personal issues, then that's probably a good sign. Again, just knowing, when you've gone too far or when you need to stop. Um, but that's what I mean by personal issues, right? Things that are non-business related. I'm reading some of Lizette's. What I don't want my client to seek my advice on such a wide range. Namely, I'd like to be approached for performance improvement questions, right? But not how do I raise my daughter right? No, I know. We have to use our judgment here and about what we're willing to talk about and what we're not willing to talk about. And you're right. You want to be consulted on performance improvement questions, but they may not even know what that means to them or what you're offering, and that's part of your pitch, isn't it? That's part of how you explain the value that you can add to an organization. So you have to think about how to frame that. Roger, I want to answer your question. I just didn't understand what you were. Sorry. I see these as and statements and not as levels. Okay. Yeah, I think I understand what you mean. You can be doing multiple uh, ones of these activities and should be doing them. That's true. What I'm trying to capture here is, kind of the progression from being, let's say, distinct from the client, not operating, closely in a collaborative relationship with the client. I mean, you can still function as an expert in pair of hands and not have a collaborative relationship. But as you become more collaborative, then you tend to be practicing the activities that are higher up in that table of comments. That's what I'm trying to say. So, what other questions or comments? Time does fly, that's for sure. We could certainly go on and on about this and go deeper into any one of these. But what are your thoughts, comments, questions? While you're thinking about one, I think the greatest graduation speech I ever heard, you've probably heard it too, was Steve Jobs at Stanford in 2004 when he said that you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect the dots in your life looking backward. Yeah, you're right, was that Steve Jobs' speech was a keeper. Just looking back, I would have loved to have had trusted advisor relationships my whole career, but it just takes time, it takes influence, persuasion, and skill, right? You need to understand the business to ever move into that kind of role. So I hope it happens to all of you if you're not there already.
Hello, this is Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes.
What I was trying to get at in my statement is that I thought that I like the progression here, and I think this is quite good. I just was trying to say, if you just put an "and" at the end of each of these statements, you sort of have the description of a project manager. That's all I was saying.
Good. I agree. Yeah. There's so many good questions. And at the risk of missing any of them, you have my email on the front, the first slide, Bud Benscoter at Boise State.edu. Send these questions if they aren't addressed to me, and I'll answer them by email or give me a call because I don't want to ignore any of you.
But I just happened to notice Lizette's question: have you had any success converting clients from one role to another? I thought that was a very interesting question.
Yes. Well, the answer is yes. It hasn't always happened, and it certainly isn't automatic. But I think the thing that broke the ice, the thing that really made that possible when I was able to do it successfully, was taking the time to understand their business so that I could use their language and not mine. Right? So I mean, we come out of these programs with, masters, PhDs. We have a whole language of our own, and we sit down with somebody in the business world who doesn't speak our language. They have their own language, and the better able I was to understand their language and frame what I saw as needs in their terminology and their language, that was kind of what broke the ice for me. I think that's probably the simplest answer I could give. You just, Lisa, I'm looking again. Do you just get better at finding clients toward the top of the list? Well, yeah, sometimes that's the case. That's true too, but not always. I mean, if you can open up a dialogue with your clients and you're working internally with a client who perceives you in kind of a narrow box, and you can start to have more business related conversations, and frame your discussions from their perspective more than your own, then they begin to trust you more. They'll open up more, and you'll find opportunities to get into the kind of projects you really want to get into, performance consulting, performance improvement kinds of things. But again, I just keep coming back to that point. You've got to understand their perspective and their language to make that happen.
This is Roger. One thing I found, and I think you have a good point you're making. One thing I found is that if you go in and say you're an instructional designer, you're almost defining yourself to them, what you do, and that's what they expect. So it's almost like if you can change that expectation, potentially they may start thinking you as more than just delivering the instructional piece of it, rather than the total performance system that maybe you should be looking at.
Absolutely. Yep. Couldn't agree with you more. In many ways, the label is very confining for us professionally, because it does kind of put a definition around what we do. It's not that what we do we don't want to do or shouldn't be doing or may not enjoy doing the rest of our life. I don't mean to suggest that. But if we're trying to expand, our field of vision, our capabilities, then that label is something we have to address. We have to explain to clients that we do more than that. And oh, by the way, this is what more means. This is what more looks like. Yes, Linda, right. Networking through professional organizations like ISPI, ATD, ODN, Organizational Development Network, can help you identify people where these kinds of opportunities might exist. Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. It's all about language, isn't it? Right? Roger, it's about language and kind of what's our elevator speech? What's our pitch? Right? How do we sell what we do? What language helps us sell what we do? I'm watching the chat box, or open your mic if you have a question. We're after 3:00, and I don't want to keep you any longer than we promised. But
so as people are leaving, Bud, before too many get away, I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us and the ISPI BABS Association. You can see by the active discussions and questions that you've pinpointed a lot of issues that are very relevant to the people who have visited us and joined us today. Particularly myself as well. I have a hard. I look at that ladder. I'm very. I can relate very much to that ladder that you show about the relationships. I see it as a ladder of growth. It's very hard to see yourself kind of parachuting in early in your career as a trusted advisor, and I can see that ladder being a growth ladder as you get more experience and develop more relationships. And so I think it's something to strive for, and because most of us aren't really going to be settled with being just the service offerer. So thank you again, Bud. That's been great.